Welcome to Energize Community Impact with Dean Eaton and J.R. Woodward. And we're here having a conversation around mission and missional movements. And it's really good to have you back again, J.R. Hi, how are you?
Good to be back. Yeah, I'm doing great.
Good. Well, for those who don't know you, I'd like to give them a little bit of an introduction, if you don't mind. Okay. J.R. has been planting churches on the east and west coast of the US for over 25 years. And some of the values that he seeks to embody in those communities are a tight-knit community, life-forming discipleship, locally rooted presence, and boundary-crossing mission. And you're the author of Creating a Missional Culture, seminal work, and that's on InterVarsity Press, and co-author with Dan White Jr., The Church as Movement on InterVarsity Press. And you co-founded the Missio Alliance. You currently serve as National Director of the V3 Church Planting Movement. You are the co-founder of the Praxis Gathering, and you've written for numerous journals and websites. You hold a Master of Arts in Global Leadership from Fuller Theological Seminary and a PhD from the University of Manchester, UK. And I do wonder if you ever got to go to a football game while you visited the UK.
Oh yeah, so I was in Manchester. I went to so Manchester has two football teams. The City and what was the other one? Do you know?
Man City and Everton, isn't it?
You Man?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to
Man United and Man City. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Manchester United.
Okay.
It was when Ronaldo was playing for them.
Wow.
And I was told that it would be impossible to get a ticket. I said, I love doing the impossible. So anybody want to drive me there to get? And so we went and with no tickets. And I was just kind of in faith, believing that somebody will be selling some and we'd be able to grab a hold of some. And sure enough, we got a couple of tickets and we were right on the 50-yard line. We were just a couple seats up. I mean, It was quite amazing time. So yeah, I did.
That's fantastic. Oh boy, it's a fantastic place, and I'm sure that we look forward to the product of your PhD work at the University of Manchester with your upcoming publication, which has a working title of.
It's called The Scandal of Leadership: Unmasking the Powers of Domination in the Church.
Wow. It sounds, actually, it's one of those titles that's pretty dramatic, isn't it, really, in and of itself? And I think people are going to be curious to get the book, but it almost sounds like it deserves a TV series. It's one of those titles. But look, it's really good to be with you again today, JR. And we started last week a conversation on communities on mission. And we talked about living into being a sent community and having, a kingdom manifesto, a kingdom message, and a kingdom method. So really embodying the gospel as a community. And today we're wanting to move into talking about communities on mission. And this is part 2 of that conversation. And we're going to talk about a range of things around being sent communities and re-explore this space. So we're going to start with talking about just defining again what it means to be a sent community would help, particularly for those who weren't with us last time.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll encourage anybody to go back and get a little bit deeper sense of that. But just like God is sent in his very nature, he's missionary God, at the center of the universe. We have the Father sending the Son, the Father and Son sending the Spirit, and the triune God sending us. And the fact that God chosen us, like Jesus takes this whole chosenness and meshes it together with our sentness. And so he goes, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. And so part of belonging to God is being a sent person. And, really the first one chosen was Abraham, right? And God blessed him, made his name great, and through him was going to be blessing all the nations. And that's probably the best way to understand our sense of chosenness. We're not chosen to be exclusive beneficiaries of God's goodness and grace, but we're chosen so that we might be a blessing to the whole nations.
That's fantastic. And one of the things that happened, we looked at last time was your a slide which you shared with us, which was really helpful. I'm wondering if we
Yeah,
could put that up
that would
again
be great. Yeah.
and speak into that a bit
But I think
more.
like one of the things that anthropologists discovered, and others like Frost and Hirsch and others have kind of popularized, is kind of this thing called the bounded set and the centered set. And as we talked about last time and previously, when I think about what is it that we're called to multiply, I think about this. There's a personal space, which is that 5 to 12 people. And that's a kind of a tight circle. So that's why it's kind of a closed circle. Jesus, when he thought, when you think about how he used the 4 spaces, he confided in the 3, he trained the 12, he mobilized the 70, and he spoke riddles to the crowds. And so when we train people at V3, really the whole first year is about starting a discipleship core of 5 to 12 people, where you develop a discipleship pathway, where you kind of learn kind of the competencies of Jesus and the character of Jesus. And but then what you're doing, because a full-on disciple is someone who lives on mission, who lives out their sentness. And so that social space is kind of indicated by a dotted line, which is kind of more of a centered set. And so you have a bounded set within a centered set. And so let me kind of talk about what that means. So Frost and Hirsch kind of use the example of if you're kind of raising cattle, and let's say you have 3 acres, you can easily kind of build a fence, right? And so you have like a bounded set. That would kind of represent a bounded set. There's kind of a clear boundaries in and out. And but what if you like had a huge amount of land and you're unable to build fences around your entire property? What they suggest is that you probably would dig some wells instead of building fences, because it's assumed that the cattle aren't going to wander away too far from the well. And so in this case here, there's this bounded set, which is kind of the community of believers, where Jesus is the very center of, and Jesus is the well, the living water. And so you're kind of building that well through the discipleship core, and that discipleship core, as we kind of pray for, connect with our unbelieving friends, then we invite them into a social space that's more of a centered set. And there's, people moving in and out of that. You might have some people who are in the circle who are moving out of the circle, some people outside the circle that are moving toward the center. It doesn't really matter. Like, the point is that we're kind of there for those people. That group is designed for them so that they might find their sense of purpose and belonging and healing and so forth. So that's kind of like, yeah, if that image kind of sticks out, I think that everybody can be a part of this. When you think about discipleship, it happens best in this personal space, and mission, I want to suggest, happens best in this social space where we get our non-Christian friends and our Christian friends connecting with each other. So yeah, keep that image in mind, but we can probably do away with it as we kind of talk about some other things.
What that sort of does is it creates a beautiful description of the idea that as a group we can have very soft edges. It's easy to break in socially with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And but it's a wonderful kind of ecosystem, as some people like to talk about today, of how you approach that series of relationships. I love those descriptions. They're fantastic. And I guess one of the things that people have in common with us who are not yet confessing any faith, or certainly maybe not the Christian faith, is there is a bunch of what theologically we might call ontological necessities, things that people are affected by or care about or long for, that we have in common as common ground in relationship, as a starting point for real conversations about life.
That's right.
I wonder if you could kind of unpack that a bit further, because that feeds into how you see discipleship and even where discipleship starts, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think like obviously everybody's kind of longing for purpose, and probably most people find some sense of purpose in their jobs. But I think about, like, I was watching Elon Musk at this kind of international conference, and his biggest concern with AI is like how many jobs it's going to take away. Here, like Andrew Yang, a former presidential candidate, talks about the fourth industrial revolution and the amount of jobs that are going to be lost by AI. And part of, I don't know where Elon Musk is in his faith and whatever, but like, one of his big concerns is like when people lose their job, they're going to lose their sense of purpose. And that was a big concern for him. And I think like the beauty is like whatever, age that we're in, like we can help people find their purpose, which is really in God and the kingdom of God that we talked about before. And so whether we have a huge shortage of jobs right now, I guess people are resigning from their jobs, so they don't feel a need for them. But wherever people desire to have a purpose, and I think this is one thing that God fundamentally gives us. But also we all hunger for justice. And so if we're a community that's about asking God, if God's reign were to be more fully realized in our neighborhood, what would be different, and we're about that task, well, then our friends that are not Christians can join us on that task. Just like I told you, my atheist friend who I was meeting with for lunch, eventually came to the point where like he wanted to serve, he wanted to do something good for the community, which is a sign of him kind of coming to Christ in a lot of ways, like Cornelius and Acts. And so we had some things that we were doing and that we were able to invite him toward. People have a sense of belonging, and whoever they have their strongest sense of belonging with is where they get their sense of identity from. And so the beauty of this bounded set within the centered set is that bounded set has a sense of belonging in Christ. And if we live that out well, people will recognize that our sense of belonging and being is so distinctly different that they're going to be hungry to want to have that type of belonging and being as well. And people are looking for personal wholeness and healing in their life. And obviously that's something that we're called to bring as well. And then whether even people realize it or not, I think people are wanting to know what is true. We kind of live in the world. We don't know the difference between fake news and real news. And often, by the way, whatever group that we belong to the strongest often determines what is false, what is fake news and what's true news, because our sense of belonging determines our rationality. And that's a very interesting thing to think about. And so, and when we understand that, I think we can have sympathy for people who are different than us, who sometimes might feel opposed to us, and that we don't move into that space because we become a part of a community. Our sense of being is from the one who gave himself for all. And we don't need to build a sense of community over and against other people, but we want to be a blessing to all people. And so I think Jesus is the one that allows us to do that. He gives us that space. And so, and then, people have a hunger for beauty, and there's nothing more beautiful than God himself. And after all, anything that we can appreciate in creation, whether it's the ocean or the mountains or whatever, is reflected and even in a greater way in the Creator himself.
Wow. I remember I was on the island of Iona doing a little walking trip in Scotland, and the Church of Scotland minister who was taking us on this little pilgrimage talked about how the creation, he quoted one writer as saying the creation is shot through with the blood of Christ, with the redemption of Christ. An old Celtic approach to merging the two ideas of creation and redemption. And when I hear you talk about these things, what I love is there's a redemptive inclusivity that doesn't deny the fact that Christ himself is distinctive, but there's an inclusivity, and the way that you're talking about doing community as sent communities, but then the qualities built in to the whole process of discipleship. It's a hopeful, it's a positive approach to people, and I've always enjoyed that about what you do. You don't set up unnecessary dichotomies for us, and yet you totally own who Christ is as our Lord, but you also own the fact that Christ is present with all people in his own way, in mysterious
Yeah.
ways we don't really understand, working in
Yeah.
people's
And thankfully,
lives.
the Spirit is working before us and around us and all of that. In some way, again, like maybe going back to missional theology is like joining God in the redemption of all things. Like God is at work already, and we
Yeah.
just have to see his fingerprints and notice them, and maybe be humble enough to kind of you know not go with like our own plans, but really kind of see what he's doing and join him in that.
When I grew up a Baptist, I was shocked during the charismatic renewal days to think about God pouring out his Spirit on Catholics,
Yeah.
And then I met some Catholics, and prayed with them and discovered they knew Jesus in a deep and rich way that I was learning to discover. And
Yeah.
but as I've grown as a Christian, and as I've studied missiology, what strikes me is that my barriers, my boundaries keep getting knocked down.
Yeah.
And then I read in Acts the shocking news that the Spirit is being poured out on all flesh, not just Jewish flesh or Christian flesh or Baptist flesh.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that really brings up for me that the matter of Jesus' radical teaching in Luke about the person of peace, which is an interesting phenomena that Jesus talks about.
That's right. Yeah. I think it's kind of one of the ways when we talk about joining God is like seeing his hand already at work in different people, right? So the person of peace concept kind of find in Luke 10, like 1 through 12. Thomas Wolfe, a kind of theologian and practitioner in America, like was one of the people that was the early people that kind of brought this back. Obviously it's something that has been used in missionaries going to other countries, but it's something now that we are our own mission field, we could be aware of. And so he has a nice little way to remember what is a person of peace. So first of all, they're kind of receptive. They're receptive to you and they're receptive to God. There's kind of this openness, like that, you just kind of sense it and realize it once you're in their presence. Reputation, they have like a reputation in their web of relationships, and that reputation could be good or it could be bad. Doesn't really matter. Like, and there's examples of both, whether it's the Matthew, his tax collector party that Jesus goes to, he probably a tax collector in those days was not the most reputable person. They're not even today, but like even more so back then. And so they're the person of reputation. So they already have like this connection with a web of relationships, or oikos, we call them in the New Testament. And then they're kind of a referral. So he kind of uses these 3 R's in the sense that they have this desire to invite us into their web of relationships, And so this is one of the beautiful things. If you think about, if you're kind of this discipleship core and you meet and you're all kind of praying for people and you're thinking about the people of peace where God's already at work at, it really kind of starts to give an imagination of what that mission space could look like. You might find yourself at a tax person's party or whatever, And so I'll give you a little example of a person of peace that I met. I was in LA. I just got out of my apartment building and I was into a book. And so in an odd way, I'm kind of reading a book as I'm going down the sidewalk, probably not paying enough attention to what's happening. And so there's a guy who kind of stops me and just said, "Hey, what are you reading? What are you doing?" I was telling him, and we ended up like having a conversation and like, "Do you want to get a bite to eat?" And like, he said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh, what about if we go here?" And he's like, "Well, like, I don't know if I can go there." And I was like, "Oh," like eventually over time, I found out that he's a Muslim. And so he could only eat clean foods. And so, okay, well, where's a place we can go where you can eat? And so we kind of ate and we started to build a friendship. And then, as we met numerous times, there was a time where I was going to be doing a wedding that was about an hour away from where I lived. And so I was trying to figure out, how I was going to, LA, the traffic's crazy. you don't want to be driving, in certain times of the day. And so I was actually trying to find a place to stay so that I could just kind of go and perform the wedding the next day. And so he just invited me to stay with him and his friends. And I was like, oh, that's wonderful. So here's this group of 4 guys, 4 Muslims, and they invite me to stay with them. And when I get there, and I have my luggage and stuff, like, where should I sleep? And they go, well, pick any room in the house, whatever room you pick is yours. I go, well, I don't want to be in position, just give me one if someone's gone away or whatever. No, you need to just pick which one that you want. And so I picked one, and whoever that person was, they found another place to sleep that night. I mean, their hospitality was absolutely amazing. Now, these were practicing Muslims. And so when it came time, they pray 5 times a day. That's that can be like a rebuke to us as Christians.
That's right.
I mean, they're devoted into this prayer. And, before they pray, they're cleaning their hands and going through all the rituals. And they invited me to pray with them. And so, I decided, like, hey, why not? I'll pray. I'm praying to my God. They're praying, to Allah. And, when they pray, they get beside one another, and there's they bow down. It's like a whole routine that I just kind of participated with them. And then we got up afterwards and we were talking. And I think maybe because I joined them in their prayer, and they probably thought that guy knew I was a Christian already. So he knew kind of where I was at in my faith, because we had a lot of discussions already. But they just asked me, like, so how do you pray, as a Christian? And for the next hour, I'm just kind of going through the Lord's Prayer, bit by bit, on how I pray and what that means for my life. So when I'm hitting, may your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as in heaven, I'm talking about what that means, like what we talked about last time. And so what I'm saying is, I met this one guy, and he had this web of relationships that he eventually, invited me into. And now I'm in this space where I'm connecting with a whole group of Muslims.
Wow, that's incredible. And so he became catalytic for you to meet a whole community. Yeah, wonderful. It's often a surprise to people who hear about the concept of person of peace, and I guess in my own experience too, people that I've seen come to faith have often been, I've recognized that they're really on the brink of conversion too. Some of these persons of peace are on the brink of conversion, and they, we see in the book of Acts various examples of this, where the apostles met different people who were at that point, and they seemed to convert quickly, but actually they were, for them, it was the last link in the chain. It was the last step. And they become then catalytic in seeing others come to faith. And one of the things that I often share with people about my own experience in church planting, JR, is that often I've gone into a community and seen 1 or 2 people come to faith, and they then have been catalytic in many others coming to faith. And it's that chain reaction. And in hindsight, I've recognized that they were a person of peace. And I think it's often in hindsight we look back and say, that was a person of peace. At the time I didn't quite get it, but and often it's, the other thing about persons of peace that I love is that often I've gone into a new community with a grand plan, right? The strategy, and it's based on my hot research, right? And my getting a vision from God, and and the Lord just brings a person of peace in, and all that just gets blown out of the water. And I'm suddenly busy just discipling who they're bringing to Christ. And, it's like God laughs at all that, I'm sure. He just thinks it's your plan is very cute, right? It's lovely. And so I share this a lot with even church leaders who get surprised by that. And I say to them, therefore, in many ways, it teaches us, it drives us back to these core things about being a sent community that is is in many respects very simple in its setup and highly relational, and very much focused upon the fact that God is having real conversations with people on their way to Christ, and we need to join in on those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And often that doesn't involve spending money on big outreach programs. That involves
not at all.
Involves turning up.
Yeah,
you
being present. Yeah,
even you accepting that hospitality to do the wedding.
Yeah,
a lot of it is about turning up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You were being there, so that was great. And so connecting and sharing with people, and you talk about connecting, sharing, and challenging spaces in your work too.
Yeah.
Could you unpack a little bit of that?
Yeah. I'll kind of unpack that just through some like a local church here that I'm kind of coaching right now. That's part of our V3 training. Because again, like really our first year is start this discipleship core in a social space. It's as simple as that. So it's like, so they've had a discipleship core going now. They've developed the discipleship pathway, which is kind of like a 8-month kind of, here's the different things that we want to learn and grow in. And then they've finally started to have some social spaces. And then what they're doing is that they're kind of exploring, especially, we're kind of still a little COVID scared. And so their group kind of has a North and South group, and they started to just once a month kind of go out for dinner and invite some of the friends that they're praying for, to the dinner. So it's just really simple. It's a connection event, and they're starting to do that. And they're finding, like this is the first time they're doing something like this. It's very foreign to them. And yet, they're excited and seeing how it's going. So even last night we were talking, and like, so as we kind of continue to do this, what do we do next? Because this dinner is not like, it's not like somebody's kind of sharing their testimony and all that. They're really kind of keeping it just on a relational connecting way. So when I think about connecting, so I kind of explain these 3 spaces. There's connecting space, there's sharing space, and there's challenging space. So the connecting space is purely designed for us to kind of connect with our other non-Christian friends, my Christian friends and non-Christian friends doing something together. And all we're doing is kind of connecting, meeting each other. Yeah. A sharing space would be, and it's important to distinguish these because it may depend on who I invite, because I kind of sensitive to where they're at in their own personal journey. But maybe a sharing space would be similar to, there's another church that has these sharing spaces where for them twice a month, they invite people over for dinner. Someone shares like like some type of quote that has been meaningful to them. And maybe 10 minutes, someone else shares a story, and then we're at our tables, dialoguing about it. And that's all it is. So it's a sharing in the sense that there's something you're learning a little bit more about people. It has a little bit more spirituality to it. And so you can have, like, sharing event can kind of have a continuum of like, what you're sharing. When we were in LA, we hosted this, the Artists at the Fountain, where we would invite bands to come in, and we would raise money for local and global social justice projects. And when we did that, we shared what gave us that motivation, which is really sharing about Christ. And so it's a very open sharing about Jesus, but very nonchalant. Then we go back to the music, and so like, that's kind of a sharing event. And then the challenging space would be more like where you're really actually challenging people to consider where they're at in their relationship with God. And so when you think about those 3 spaces, as he's kind of saying, okay, we're kind of doing these social spaces, connecting, but like there feels like a long ways from the people in our social space that are non-Christians to this discipleship core. Like, how do we kind of deal with this? Like, feels like a fairly long thing. There's not many that I'm ready to invite to this yet. And so, yeah, I go, that's a great question. And so I think when you think about, as I kind of gave these type of spaces, I said, you can think about these both formally and informally, and you can think about them in a regular rhythm or just something that's special things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, the sharing, like I said, you could, you have intimate space. You could invite some of these people into your space and just talk more deeply about life. And when you're sharing about your life, you're sharing about, what's up with your relationship with God and people and how all of that interacts. So they're going to hear just kind of naturally out of your heart some of the things about God. That's kind of one way. Another way is like you have these dinner things that are going once a month. Maybe once a month you have a sharing event, and this kind of exposes people a little bit more to the Christ story, and there's many ways that you can have these sharing spaces. I said the other way is like you could have just a 4 to 6 week thing that you invite people who've been coming to the dinners on, what does it mean to be a peacemaker? And by the way, it could be like we all come with our ideas. I come with my idea of how Jesus was a peacemaker. They come with their ideas. We're just sharing ideas with each other. It's not necessarily even me teaching, but we can kind of learn from each other on whatever issue or whatever idea that is important for all of us, right? And so that's kind of where we're kind of sharing in a little bit more of our life with them. And then the challenging thing is like, eventually in a group, when you got 30, 40, 50 people coming on a regular basis to some type of dinner or maybe even a sharing event, there's going to be some of those that are like going to be asking you like, what's this community is so unique? Like, why do you guys do this? And what they're really saying is like, how do I, become a part of this? What does it mean? So you kind of have maybe a 4 to 6 week, what I call bridge, of like a formal bridge where you really kind of go in more detail of what the good news is all about. And by the end of it, I think you'll find that a number of them, because you've kind of chosen the ones that are kind of the most receptive and seem like eager to learn, a lot of them will come to faith. And there's a church that I stayed with in Hawaii where they did this. They had successful social events, sharing events. I encouraged them to do this because they hadn't seen a lot of new Christians. I said, well, you should think about this 4 to 6 week thing. Just bring people. And they thought, yeah, there's probably out of this 50, there's 8 people. They brought them in. It was done really well. Like somebody shared like 10, 15 minutes. Someone shared a testimony. They did some discussion. They had dinner. Like it was very laid back. And by the end of that 6 weeks, they came to faith and they became the next discipleship core that now, as you know, like they have a lot of non-Christian friends, probably a lot more than the Christians have. Yeah. And so it's a very easy social space to develop again and multiply yourself.
That's wonderful. And JR, in your training of people working in this space, and even if we think about the role of the challenging space and the sharing space, it seems to me that giving people confidence to go into that space as a dialogue space, as a space which is going to be messy, which is going to be involving a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of legitimately so, of co-learning. Yes. And there's a humility in that, but there's a messiness in that. And what I find is that a lot of pastor teachers will tend to want to implement into their church programs around sharing and challenging spaces that are formulaic, right? In other words, I'm going to train 5 leaders to do alpha, and they're going to do the full 10 weeks because you got to do the whole thing, right? It's a curriculum, get with the program, right? We're not going to break it up, right? Whereas people who work in this space would tend to view something like alpha. Well, in my case, certainly I've utilized bits of alpha over the time, over the years, but I've always found that I've had to granulate it and break it up and go left and right with it and almost manipulate it to fit with the actual conversation going on with the people I'm having with, having it with so it's a tool, but soon as it always feels to me uncomfortable thinking, we've got to see this through. It's 10 weeks. And, and I don't think alpha necessarily discourages it being utilized in all sorts of ways. I think they do. But could you tease that out a bit? And this is not an anti-alpha thing. This is just simply saying the approach of how we train people in this space and how they use tools and curriculums and.
Well, so like in some ways, I mean, I would look at Alpha as kind of example, bit more of the challenging space, and that's
Yeah,
kind of when people are at the point where they really do want to hear, and they want to kind of go through a thoughtful way of doing something. And but you know, when you're in the sharing space, I think the beauty is like, you know, you just kind of learn about people. So one of the things I did when I was in LA, one of the space I started is like we just kind of shared our story,
yeah,
and people shared for like 2 hours. Like, you know, we eat, have some wine, and like they just
yeah,
kind of open up about their lives, and I'm just kind of listening and learning what they're learning, and we're just doing this time after time, and the group just continues to grow, and all we've done is share stories, you know. um but when you kind of think about a theme, like everybody, people want to participate, you know, people have things that they've learned, you know.
mm,
There's a general revelation and special revelation, and like we should appreciate all of
yeah,
it, you know. And like you said, like I mean, there's the beauty and the messiness. Like even us who feel like we have a full grasp of truth, you know, none of us are have it perfectly. I mean, if
yeah.
NT Wright says like, hey, like probably 20% of what I say is untrue, I just don't know what 20% of it is. I think we could all have a little bit of humility.
Yeah. That's right.
So, so the beauty of like, you know, like just being able to have some sharing spaces where you pick topics and really just have people come and share what is meaningful to them. You learn a lot about them, you know, and whatever kind of grasp of truth that you might have, you're probably able to share it in a much better way, like you said, and kind of tailor it to how it connects to the thing that they've already discovered.
Yeah,
Like, because God is already at work. And I think fundamentally, that's kind of what we're saying. God is at work in people, and we're trying to find where he's at work. And so if you have a nice, messy sharing space, you're able to kind of pick up that, and then you're able to kind of be a unique presentation of what the good news is, because you've taken the time to listen, you've taken the time to get to know somebody and where they're at. You think about Jesus, did he ever interact the same methodical way
no,
with everybody that he connected with? No. Like the rich young man, you know, like sell everything you got, like he did say that to everybody, you know, but that's what the message that he needed to hear. You know, Zacchaeus, and like you just look at story after story, they're all unique and different. And so I think the beauty of having both kind of a loose, you know, sharing space, and even like even though the challenging space may have kind of themes to it, you keep a flexibility to it, so that you're, you know, connecting it to the actual people that God has you sent to, that he's built this, you know, given you these relationships. And it really is a way to
mm,
honor the people that you're connecting with, and to realize like fundamentally they got again, there's probably things I feel like I can learn from anybody, and everybody can teach me something.
yeah,
And when you have that mindset, you know, you become pretty attractive yourself. And
yeah.
it's not like I have some other fundamental things that I really want them to know, but I want to know about them, and I know what they think and believe and how they behave and why they do that. Like that's just fascinating for me.
Well, that's incredible, JR, and it really gives some great uh, reflections upon the fact that if we're looking for clues about what to do in the connecting and even sharing space, that the longings that you describe of purpose,
Yes.
justice, belonging, wholeness, truth, beauty, these are gateway conversations, aren't they? And
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
depending if the for example, if the person's an artist or a musician, there's a gateway in there around beauty and truth. You know, if they're a person with a strong sense of justice, then again, there's that conversation, purpose, belonging, all of those things that we would broadly describe as human flourishing or well-being today as well. Um,
Hmm.
they're gateway conversations, aren't they? And
Yep,
that then
absolutely.
leads us into a staged conversation. And so we're perhaps training people to be good listeners and good conversationalists, and that but also the organization of leading a group intentionally to be prayerful and to go into relationships and to support one another in the going in uh,
Yep, very
is
necessary.
the sent community aspect, right? And so it
Yep,
is important to have that. And
yep,
there's some of us need a lot of structure uh, in the things we're involved in, and others of us love to float in the system.
yeah.
And you know, and there's people in between. And so what I love about the dynamics of what you've described to us today, it allows for all of those folks to be in
Yeah.
Ascent community, right?
Yep. Yeah. We do it together, and that's the beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's like we're all in together, and so there may be people I meet initially that I'm praying for, and as I introduce them, and they meet my other friends, that some of my other friends have become better friends with them, and they may came to faith through them. It's like, but the beautiful thing is that we're doing it together, and usually within a group of 12 there's going to be some that are kind of more evangelists, and they're meeting like more people than they can handle, and so they need to be good at introduce them to other people. So the beautiful thing about community is that it's a communal thing, and we do it together. And so that's why some of these spaces have some formal elements there, that they're ongoing and regular, so that like we can kind of do it together.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that's fantastic, JR. Next time we get together, we're going to talk about being a communities of faith, hope, and love, and after that, we're going to talk about the whole principle of coming near, to use the acronym that you've just used for neighborhoods, and we'll talk about that in another episode. So we look forward to a couple more times of conversation with you to build on these things. I really want to thank you today. It's been a really rich conversation. I've found it very helpful. It's helped me really refocus, even in my mission in life. My wife and I have just taken on a repot, really, of a little church, and
awesome.
So for us, this is fresh again for us, all of this. So
yeah.
Really wonderful, and it would be great to see V3 come to Australia sometime. Maybe there's scope for that conversation down the track.
Sure, yeah. That'd be
Anyway,
great.
bless you for your time today. Thank you,
Thank
JR.
you.
We'll see you next time.
All right,
Bye.
take care, Dean.